All right. Can I borrow that microphone? All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Alex.
Hi.
Thanks for coming to Flyleaf Books and for your book purchases, your RCPs. You help us have events like this, and we really appreciate it. Tonight, we have the honor of hearing from Bob Crawford, presenting America's Founding Son with David Menconi. Bob Crawford is the bassist for the Grammy-nominated band The David Brothers and creator of the podcast series Founding Son, John Quincy's America. He's also co-host of the Road to Now History podcast. Bob and his wife, Melanie, are co-managing partners for the Press On Fund, an organization that seeks to find less toxic treatments for childhood cancer. The 2019 Piedmont Laureate, David Menconi, is a journalist and author in Raleigh, North Carolina. He spent 34 years writing for daily newspapers, 28 of those at the Raleigh News and Observer. All right, we hope you enjoy the event. We have America's Founding Son, as well as some of David's books up front, so grab one of those if you haven't already and you can get them signed. All right, and then over to y'all. Continue on.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to start this in a kind of unusual way. I'm going to read a story Bob told me a number of years ago about his day job. And this is how the chapter on the David Brothers in my North Carolina music book that came out a few years ago ends. Sometimes I miss the intensity of the early days, Bob Crawford told me in 2018. I'll see clips from back when we were just jamming. Did I move like that, really? I spent a lot of years watching them to see what they do next and try to guess, zig and zag when they did. But here's what the old days were really like. One time we were in Augusta, Georgia, playing the next night in Charleston. We get in the van, start driving, and 40 miles down the road, I realized I'd left my suit at the hotel. I was so scared it was another 10 miles before I spoke up. Scott, I left my suit in the closet at the hotel. He's super pissed, not saying a word, just glaring. We drove all the way back, got to the front door, and he finally looked at me. Bob, he said, when you get your suit, can you grab mine too? It was the greatest thing that ever happened in my life.
Yeah, there was it is amazing. It was, if you know their father, if you know Jim David, this is a man who built their house and they live out on a hobby farm, and he had a bridge welding company. Like, we're talking about something, a really blue collar life. And it was a thing where they say, if you're on time, you're late. You know, if you're late, don't bother showing up. And that was kind of the ethos of the early days. Like, you know, and I think Scott kind of assumed this role, being the older brother between him and Seth, was like that we had a construction company. Like, that was the whole thing. That we were a bridge welding company. You know, and mistakes like that it's just crushing. Like, it just was crushing. I remember in the old days, this one, it's like three of us, and I remember we would be in a hotel, and there was always, like, you know, the door faces to the outside of the world. It wasn't like one of these ones where you walk in and your room, you go up an elevator and the room's inside. No, we were in those kinds of motel, I guess motel, right?
Yeah, right.
And I would wake up as the door cracked and they were leaving to get in the van. Like, not like, all right, we're getting up, let's go. It was just like they got up and they left. And then I'm like, you know, forced to gather my things as quickly as possible and get out there. And so, yeah, the humanity of Scott also for getting the suit felt like complete redemption.
Yeah. In that movie, that scene where Scott kind of throws a fit.
Which one?
Which
fit? No.
What was it? I mean, did that just put you right back in the middle of situations like that, or?
Well, as I got the worst of it, and as we took more and more people into our organization, no one got what I got. And I got less and less. I didn't get any. I got none. I got 0. And when that happened, when that went down, it didn't faze me personally, because I understand where Scott's coming from. I know what he meant. You know what I'm saying? I could see how he could feel that way. Now, you know, I felt bad for Mike Marsh, you know, in that situation, but I understand what he was saying. You know, that's a very Scott thing. Like we were 2 years into this thing, and we went to this thing called NACA, which is a conference for the people who book music acts for college campuses. And for a band, when you're making $50 a night, you go to this conference and you get, like, if you're lucky, you get 10, 15 bookings, and they're paying you $750 to $1,500 to come play in the cafeteria or somewhere on campus for an hour, and they're giving you a hotel room and meals. And then you can go play wherever the mug night is in town and make the $50, like, and really get in front of people. You know, like, it was just, this is like, we were making it, like, we were totally making it. And we'd be driving around, and Scott be like, I think I just want to quit this, and I want a Christmas. I just want to, like, move to, where's that place in North Carolina where all the Christmas tree farms are? Silva, Sparta.
Okay.
I'm going to move to Sparta and get a Christmas tree farm. That's what I want to do. And I'd be like looking at Seth, like, and Seth be like. And so, you know, it didn't, so I can respect and understand where Scott comes from in that situation all those years later. But also, it didn't faze me.
Do you miss those early hardscrabble days?
I don't know.
You're supposed to say, "Oh yes."
I mean, I don't know. I don't know that I actually miss those days, because it was hard. Yeah, it was really hard. Now these days are hard as well, but it's a different kind of hard.
Yeah,
you know.
Sure. Well, let's get to John Quincy Adams.
Yeah.
He left behind 14,000 pages of writings.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Probably more than that.
Which seems like a mixed blessing. How much of that would you guess you've read over the years?
The book's still good, but I don't think I've probably read half of it. You know, I've read a lot, and the 14,000 that David's talking about is his diary, which he kept from the time that he was a teenager to when he died in 1848. And it is all available online through the Massachusetts Historical Society. We have an alumnus here from there. And it's called primarysourcecoop.org. And you go on there and you can search by the year, by the date, by a name, by a phrase. It's an incredible gift, an incredible database. So, you know, I did lean heavily on that, as well as the congressional records that are all available online as well, going back to the founders.
So you call him the OG political maverick.
Yes.
What made him that?
Well, the most glaring example of his early political life was he was a senator from Massachusetts while Thomas Jefferson was president. And John Quincy Adams was a Federalist, being from New England and being the son of John Adams. And Jefferson was the opposition party. He was a Democratic Republican. And Adams supported Jefferson on the purchase of the Louisiana Purchase and with the Embargo Act. That was a failed attempt to stay out of war with Great Britain, that we wound up having a war. But he broke with his party to do that and was summarily drummed out of his party. And so that's the initial act of political independence. Now, he's John Adams' son. John Adams, who, before the Revolutionary War, defends the British soldiers in a court of law after the Boston Massacre. You know, and there is an element in John Quincy Adams' life that's very reflective of a behavior like that. And these guys came from Puritanism, right? And they were, John Adams and John Quincy Adams were so moral that it was a problem for them and for their political career. They were moral to a fault, and they were very self-righteous. And that made Adams a terrible president, and it made him an incredible congressman. And so that streak of independence is really, where did it first show itself? Well, I think the most obvious place is when he was a senator, but it was with him through his whole life.
And this was unusual for back then, this maverick streak. Did he have contemporaries like that, or was he kind of out there on his own?
Well, again, his father. This is the time, so my book focuses 1820 to 1848. 1820, Missouri Compromise, but really the Missouri Crisis. And this is a moment where, if you want to say the Constitutional Convention and the Three-Fifths Compromise were a Band-Aid put over slavery, the issue of slavery, the Missouri Crisis ripped that Band-Aid off. And there was a pussy, festering wound underneath it. And so, also, we're about 50 years into America. And, Washington was famously above party, and he warned of parties right when he leaves his farewell address. After Washington leaves, the parties just form and the factions form. So it is this moment, and in fact, 1828, Andrew Jackson will defeat Adams for re-election to the presidency, and that is the beginning of the Democratic Party, largely as we know it today. Not in ideology, not in mission statement, but that party of Andrew Jackson, party that was really created by Martin Van Buren, still exists with us today. And that is really, this is the beginning of the party structure that we know today and experience today. So if your question's about political courage, this was when people realized political courage is terrible for your political career.
I kind of can't even imagine how he would respond to today's politics.
I'll tell you, he would not be surprised. He would have told us, he would have decried an out-of-control executive, Article 1 branch of the Constitution. He would have decried it probably during FDR. And everything after, like the rise of this, imperial presidency, and that, like this thing, he would be surprised that we didn't have what we have now 100 years ago. Like, people thought Andrew Jackson was going to make himself king. Like, that was like the fear. No one knew when Andrew Jackson was running for president. No one knew what to expect from his presidency. And Andrew Jackson surprised people in a sense when South Carolina tried to nullify federal laws, the tariff that South Carolina said they weren't going to pay.
Right.
And Jackson was ready to march troops down in South Carolina. And because he was the president of the United States and he believed in a federal system. But Jackson did exhibit a lot of the personal animus and was motivated by personal animus in a way very similar to today. So all that to say, Adams will be surprised. But my prediction is, and there are smarter people at the Massachusetts Historical Society that may or may not disagree with me, but he would not be surprised by any of this. He wouldn't be surprised by the character in the White House. And if anything shocked him, it would be that a bass player from a band wrote a book about it. And that I can't translate the Psalms from the original Hebrew like he could, and that I can't translate books into German. But other than that, yeah.
So yeah, Adam's time was just immense partisanship, and
Yes.
slavery being the biggie. And now we're in a similar place over almost too many things to mention.
Yeah, David was really quick on this. All media was partisan back then. Like if you were a politician, you had a newspaper. Like if you were a candidate for an office, or it was either you got the news from, Andrew Jackson's side, or you got the news from John Quincy Adams' side. Like that's just how it was. There was no independent investigations of any kind.
Well, yeah, the whole idea of an impartial media was not like it. We act like it's the natural order of things. No, it was this.
It was an advent of the 20th century.
Yeah. I mean, sort of like in the record business, we act like the careers bands used to have in the 60s and 70s was the natural order of things. And now we're back to like one-hit wonder pop stars, and maybe that's really what it's supposed to be.
That's right. Yeah.
So maybe this kind of partisanship is the
Right.
natural order of things.
Yeah, it very well may be.
Do you take any comfort from the fact that we've been here before in America?
I take comfort, but not peace. I'm comforted that, like, we're having a human experience together, like human beings trying to self-govern themselves. But it doesn't shield me from the daily, just fire hose of whatever's coming at us. Like I am just taken aback by it and just overwhelmed and exhausted by it all. The things that I understand why they're happening, things I don't understand why they're happening. Like nobody asked to end the war on cancer. Like nobody asked for that. Nobody voted for that. But that is what's happening. It's very, very intentionally happening. But no one's even said why it's happening. It's almost a denial that it's happening. But all the evidence is that it's happening. So like there's the things like that like, why is this happening? To the immigration stuff, where I'm like, well, they said that's what's going to happen. Like it's awful, but he told us that's what's going to happen. So,
well, yeah, there was a book about all of this.
That's right.
The whole Project 2025
Yeah.
thing, and it surprises me that anyone is surprised.
that's right.
Here we are. Well, John Quincy Adams is the only president that served in Congress after being president.
Yes.
And would you rank him as America's greatest ex-president?
I would rank him as America's greatest public servant. And he's probably America's greatest ex-president, with all due respect to Jimmy Carter, who took it in a different direction. His post-presidency was great in the sense of humanitarian sense, and he had a great ex-presidency. I've read a little bit. Herbert Hoover had a pretty busy ex-presidency. But John Quincy Adams, I think, we always thinking about rising to the top, like whatever you're going to be the best at it, be the boss, become the boss, right? All that kind of stuff. And what is the most ego-filled job in the world besides rock star or celebrity? It's president of the United States. It takes a lot of ego to be president of the United States. And
So you'll be running.
no, you're not. Sherman. I'm Sherman. But Adams completely deactivated that by going into Congress. Like he rose to become president of the United States, just like his parents groomed him to do. And then he lost re-election, and he didn't just go home and write, his father, a book about his father, or, he was going to go and organize his father's papers and this and that. He was asked to stand for Congress, and he thought, I'm not going to run, but if the constituents want to elect me to serve them, how can I say no? And when his wife heard about it by reading it in the newspaper, and his son heard about it and came to him and said, "You can't do this. This is a demotion. This is belittle. This is beneath you." He says, "How can I be?" He essentially said, "I'd be on the city council if people want me to do it. Like this is what I'm supposed to do." politics was the air he breathed, you know, and it gave him great purpose. He made the most of it. He really did make the most of it.
Have you ever considered going into politics? Not necessarily running, but working behind the scenes. Or
I'm definitely intrigued by it, but I really can't fit it in my schedule.
Well, yeah. Let's back up a little bit. How did you come to decide on JQA as a subject in the first place?
I read a book in these early days of touring around the band. There was a lot of time to read. We were in the country was involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I saw David McCullough. This is like 2004, probably 2005, and I saw David McCullough on all the shows on TV. Every time I turned on TV, he was there, and I loved the way he talked about American history. And I was always just naturally drawn to American history and captivated by it. And so I began reading his books. I read John Adams in 1776. And then one of the next books I read was called The Rise of American Democracy from Jefferson to Lincoln. It was by Sean Wilentz, who's from Princeton. Great historian, amazing guy. He's written liner notes for Bob Dylan. He's great. But his book introduced me to this time period, this time between the revolution, like after the nation, the early republic, if you will, up to the Civil War, and I was just, first of all, blown away by it, like all the characters and all the intrigue and everything that went on, and all the precedent that we live with today that I never knew existed or had happened. And Adams was one of these guys who just kept popping up, right? You're reading about Monroe's presidency, and it's John Quincy Adams who creates the Monroe Doctrine. He negotiates Florida into the Union. Then you read about other stuff, and you come back, and here he is, elected president in probably the craziest election we've ever had. 1824. It was bonkers. It was bonkers. You think it's crazy now? This election, we could be here for hours and just talk about this election. And then, then you go on, you read other stuff. Here comes Jackson. You're reading all about Jackson. Then here he is again. He's in Congress. This guy's in Congress. And here he is bringing the issue of slavery out from the shadows onto the floor of Congress. And he's gagged. They pass a rule in the Congress where you can't mention slavery because John Quincy Adams won't shut up about it. And then he defends these mutinied captives aboard the slave ship, the Amistad. And here he is before the Supreme Court, the man who witnesses the Battle of Bunker Hill at the age of 7. He crosses the Atlantic with his father in the winter at the age of 10. He's a senator from Massachusetts. Then Washington appoints him to his first diplomatic post. And here he is as an old man, old congressman, and he's defending these enslaved captives. And he wins before the Supreme Court. And then you keep reading, and here you find out that at the end of the Mexican War, he collapses in the house at his desk. He dies at his desk. He dies with his boots on. And I just couldn't believe how we all didn't know about John Quincy Adams.
It does seem like he's gotten short shrift.
By the way, Washington appointed him to his first diplomatic post. Well, when he dies in the House of Representatives, Abraham Lincoln is there as a congressman. So you think about these two periods of our history. Washington, the Revolution, the Civil War, they must be different worlds. And indeed, they are different eras. But the man standing in the breach is John Quincy Adams.
So when you took this on, how did book research fit into your schedule playing music?
Being a musician, at this point you said, aren't you glad, or do you wish it was the old days, blah, 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 blah. Well, the old days, you're in a van, and you're driving all night, or you're driving all day, and you show up at the club, and it's like 4 o'clock, and you sound check, and then you go pitter around somewhere, and this and that, and then you go on stage at 11 o'clock, and you're playing till 1, 2, whatever. You couldn't write a book in the old days, but the way we do it now, you're in a tour bus. I'm 55, so I wake up by 7 a.m. That's sleeping late. And then I don't have to be anywhere till sound check at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. That's a whole work day. And so it's actually very conducive for research. The issues become when you need a letter, like his diary's all online, congressional records are all online. There's a lot of, I believe, all the stuff that is online for research in this time period. There was an abolitionist who I really wanted to make part of the story. Like he is part of the story, but I really wanted to have a strong light on him. Benjamin Lundy. He had a newspaper called The Genius of Universal Emancipation. They are all at a library in Columbus, Ohio. So I called the library and I was like, hey, can you make copies of these? There's 50 editions of this that they have. What they told me was, they sent me a list of genealogists. They said genealogists do this kind of work. So I would hired somebody in Columbus, and she copied and scanned all these newspapers for me, and for a fee. And I did that in a few different places. And the Massachusetts Historical Society, of course, was very kind, and if I needed a letter or something, they were happy to send it to me.
Looks like the touring starts up again June 10th,
Uh-huh.
and you're going to be busy all summer.
Uh-huh.
Do you have a show in this area anytime soon?
I can look on my phone, but we played in Greensboro recently. I don't know this area, but if this area means North Carolina, I know there will be shows in North Carolina before the end of
It's
this
the
year.
Scruggs Festival.
Oh yeah, thank you. My gosh,
We were
you
just
just
talking
told me.
about it. In Tryon.
Tryon. Okay.
Yeah, it's the ways west.
That'll be great. by
Oh,
the
the
way.
Scruggs-
It's a festival.
Is that
Scruggs
August?
Festival?
That's August, right?
That's
like Labor Day.
September.
September 4th to 6th.
Okay. Cool. Have you decided on a next book topic yet?
I think I have. I wrote a mini, what do you call that, book proposal for something, and I sent it to my agent because I guess you got to go through him, this kind of stuff. But I have a different idea now. And I haven't told him, and I've started to research, and I'm really excited about this idea. So. Hopefully the publisher will want to do another book.
Is it more history?
Oh yeah, of course. Yes.
I mean, do you have any interest in fiction or?
No, I have zero interest in fiction. like negative zero. There are fiction books. I've been reading Moby Dick for the first time. But that's because it was written in 1850, and that fits into my urban.
Yeah, you've got a real thing for the 19th century.
I want to read the great fiction writers. I want to read Cormac McCarthy. I've never read Cormac McCarthy. I think he's apparently the greatest writer ever. But I also, if I'm taking time reading that, I'm not reading the area of focus.
Well, what's the next musical project, either with or without the Avett Brothers?
Well, it would be with the Avett Brothers, and I'm sure there'll be an album, but that will probably be next year. We have another project we're working on that I can't really talk about. It's really different. It's got something to do with music, but it's really out there.
Well, the Mike Patton record was certainly
right. We are 25 years into this thing. 25 years in, so it's time to do some. Look, most bands 25 years in, like any bands who made it 25 years in, they squandered their money on projects of self-destruction. So we're squandering our money on other things, but they're very creative and positive.
Well, yeah, Broadway. That was
cool. Yeah, that was a squandering. Yes.
songs. I mean, yeah,
It was amazing.
It wasn't lucrative.
Can
but it
anybody
was
see
great.
that musical? It was incredible. It was so good. It was so good they had to shut it down. The cast was incredible. And now people are doing it at colleges and community theaters, and it lives. It lives, but
What's it called?
it's called Swept Away. Yeah. I'll
And it
tell
got-
you about what it's about, but I don't want to spoil it.
It's a grim story.
It's grim. It's dark.
Yeah.
It's dark, and they probably, and there were smarter people than I, and whatever. It's all seemed like it was really happening. It took 10 years, and we didn't write it. And there's producers came to us about it, but it featured our music. It took our music and it told a story. It's what they call a jukebox musical. Is what they call these. And really, it was incredible. There were amazing people involved with it. The set design was it was nominated, I think, for a Tony. But it premiered. It's very grim. It's very dark, and it premiered on Broadway at Christmas time. And so it just really didn't have a chance. We probably shouldn't have went to Broadway.
Cannibalism, holiday fun
I didn't.
for the whole
I wasn't
thing.
going to go there. I wasn't going to say that. Yeah, it's about cannibalism. So
On the high seas.
it's about a bunch of men driving around in a boat, and then there's cannibalism.
There's a metaphor in there
It's
somewhere.
wild, yeah.
So going back to JQA, what's the biggest surprise about him that you learned from all of this? You probably had dived deeper into his life than anyone else.
Yeah, when I was working on the book, how big his depression was, how much he suffered from depression, and his family suffered from depression, and how he would write about it in his diary. Everything from describing how he felt, like this idea of like don't want to eat, things that bring me pleasure don't bring me pleasure anymore, like that kind of expression. You know,
Was he diagnosed at the time, or was it?
I don't think they
retrospect?
diagnosed it at the time.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, November 2nd, 1837, in his diary, he writes about a man visiting him named Thomas Monroe. And Thomas Monroe, at this point, Adams is well into his 70s. Thomas Monroe is a contemporary of his. He was for many years postmaster of Washington, D.C. And then when Jackson came in, he fires all the civil servants, all the appointees. He lost his job then. He also lost 2 adult children, and his wife was very ill. And Adams had also lost 2 adult children, and he lost a daughter in infancy. And so Monroe comes to visit him, and he says, "My doctor tells me I'm suffering from the Blue Devils. Now we're here. We've all suffered from Blue Devils a time or two. Look at me." But he says, what have you? And Adams describes this guy as a hypochondriac. And I need to look up if hypochondriac means exactly what we have come to have it mean today. And actually, we don't even say that anymore. I still say it, but I've been to therapists and they go, "Oh, we don't say that word anymore." So, but this guy says, "Have you ever suffered the Blue Devils?" And John Quincy Adams is like, "Oh yeah, I have." He's like, "I'll tell you, the only prescription for the Blue Devils is activity, is work." Basically, he's saying work, keep yourself busy. And he says physical exercise. He says, what's he say to him? Asked him if he likes to ride a horse, and he's like, yeah, I've done that a little bit. And he says, do you go swimming? And I think at the time you would go to these spas, right? Like it's funny, Omni, the organization, the hotel business Omni, they bought a bunch of these up, like this, the Homestead in Virginia. There's one in Bedford Springs in Pennsylvania where Buchanan lived for a time, and Polk visited. I think John Quincy Adams visited as well. But there's places where these hot springs are. And so this guy says, yeah, I used to, but I can't afford to anymore. When Adam says that, asked me if Adam says, do you enjoy company? He's like, oh, no, I don't enjoy company. I can't stand it, especially if it's my family. I can't stand it. But Adam says, the only cure for the Blue Devils is intellectual involvement, being active, exercise, vigorous exercise. Like those are the cures. What I know are the cures for the Blue Devils. So yeah, there was depression, and in fact, alcoholism ran through Abigail Adams's side of the family. And Charles Francis's diary. Charles Francis was John Quincy Adams' youngest son, and the only son who survives into adulthood, or survives. His other two sons died. One dies by suicide, but he was probably an alcoholic, and then another one dies of essentially of alcoholism, and the effects of alcoholism in the body. And Charles Francis is the youngest son, and Charles Francis will go on to be Abraham Lincoln's minister to Great Britain. So he has a very successful career. And Charles Francis says in his diary, he says, I wonder if there isn't something about, I guess, temperance, they called it at the time. I wonder if it's not, it doesn't run in families. Like this is like 150 years, I looked it up, it's like 150 years before alcoholism was brought into whatever the DSM or whatever the medical books, the term alcoholism. He's recognizing, I think this is a medical thing.
So you've done podcasting for years, and you've written a book. Which was harder? Which do you find more difficult?
Oh, writing a book.
Really?
Yeah, podcasting. It's hard, but you kind of lose yourself in it. Just like this moment, like we're all here, we're talking. I picked my kids up from school like at 4 o'clock, and I had to get home. I had to get them fed. And I'm rushing to get here on time, and I'm all flustered. I get here I'm with all you guys. I'm having a great time. We're having this conversation. That's what podcasting is like. You prep the conversation. You got to read a book or listen to a book. Whatever you can get away with. But once you start recording, I always enjoy those conversations. Like it really settles me, and I get very focused on the conversation. The book is just you're constantly thinking about it, as you must know. You've written several, and I don't know about you, but I could never turn it off. Like I had a rule I had a rule for myself. And it's funny? Radio host Michael Sparkanish played this clip of David McCullough a few weeks ago. And McCullough was talking about, people ask him how much time he spends writing or how long it takes to write a book. McCullough said, nobody ever asked me about how much time I spend thinking. And that's what I found like for writing a lot of things. Really, for writing the book, you just lay there at 4 a.m. and you're just thinking through. You're kind of like connecting the dots. And I had this rule for myself, like once sound check would happen, gotta put it away. Now it's time to go to work. So because you have sound check at 2 or 3 o'clock, you get off stage at 4:30, and you call home, see what's going on there. Then you eat dinner at 5, and then you got like an hour, and then you've got like a rehearsal before the show, and then you got the show. And the worst would be when I would get back after sound check, and I'd have to get back into, what was I reading? Like I need to go back and look at that, or think about that, or where can I find this document, or what did this person say, or what's this connection? And then I'd be on stage sometimes, and I'd just be trying to connect these dots. That was not good. And the worst, which I really loathe to do, but did on very few occasions, was after the show. Because then just get in your bunk and you want to go to bed, but you're just going to turn it off.
The infamous circus brain.
It really is. It's a three-ring circus in my head.
3 a.m. the witching hour.
It really is.
Why don't we solicit some questions from all of y'all?
Bob, tell us, I don't know your history with your education and research, and what does that look like for you?
I got my undergraduate at Stockton. It was like Stockton State College when I went in South Jersey, state school. Richard Stockton, who it's named for, signed the Declaration of Independence for New Jersey. He was one of the first, one of the only signers to be imprisoned. He spent the Revolution on a prison ship. Died shortly after. His grandson is in this book. Shows up in this book.
Yeah, he's on the, forget the name.
He was an admiral.
Yeah.
An admiral
In
in the Navy.
the accident with the guy.
That's right.
Peacemaker.
That's right. Yes. Wow. I don't know if anybody knows the story of this ship. It's called the Princeton. Was the name of the ship. Anyway, that's a diversion, and it's a wild story, and it's like I kind of look at it like one of our early times of national mourning, right? Anyway, it's another thing. Education. So I got a communications degree. I moved down to North Carolina in '96. I started working in the film business in Charlotte as like a production assistant and grip electric and did like some audio, and then I realized that was a dead end for me. And in 2000, I went back to college at Winthrop University to study jazz guitar. And that's when I got an upright bass, and that's when I met Scott and Seth through that. And then I got a bachelor's there. And then in 2017, I started getting my master's through Arizona State University online, master's in history. And I finished that in 2020. My thesis was on the Research Triangle Park, by the way.
I thought maybe the book could have tied into your master's, like you started it back then.
It didn't. It
Yeah.
didn't. You know. But
Do you think you'll get a PhD?
no, I don't. I'll tell you why. It's about 6 years to do so. I had somebody at Ohio State offered me to do it there, but I wanted to write a book, and I could get my PhD and write a book, or I could just write a book. And I do all the other stuff.
Not the middleman.
I just wondered if you could talk about Louisa.
Oh yeah,
role she played.
LCA, Louisa Catherine Adams. He was married to Louisa Catherine Adams, and she was actually our first foreign-born First Lady. And John and Abigail Adams were not too happy when John Quincy Adams fell in love with her, because what would it like for a president of the United States to have a foreign-born wife?
Gosh, man.
Her father, Joshua Johnson, so they met in England when John Quincy Adams was a diplomat. And her father was from Maryland, and he was like American consul in London, in England. And they, get married. And I think the Johnsons come back to the United States, and her father kind of goes broke, and he was a slave. That was like there was slave holding in her family. Like, in fact, she had many sisters. They were all very beautiful, and they all played music. But they were all they all owned enslaved people. But Louisa was a brilliant writer, a brilliant thinker. She promoted his early political career. She really helped him become president. She really did. But after he became president, it seems that she had a lot of health afflictions, and John Quincy Adams was appointed minister to Russia by James Madison in 1812. And they're about to leave for Russia. John Quincy Adams, Louisa Catherine Adams, their youngest son, Charles Francis. They have these two older boys, John Adams II and George Washington Adams. And as it's told by Louisa's biographer, Louisa Thomas, who wrote an amazing book about Louisa Catherine Adams, they're on the dock, about ready to leave. And John Quincy Adams' brother, Thomas, tells Louisa Catherine that George Washington Adams and John Adams II, the older boy and the middle boy, are not going with him. And apparently this plan was hatched by Abigail. Look, it'd be hard to be a member of the Adams family. It would be worse to marry into the Adams family. And she doesn't see those boys for 6 years. And she never really forgives John Quincy Adams for that. And those boys have troubled adulthoods, and they die. I think George Washington Adams dies in his 20s, and I think John Adams II dies in his early 30s, if not younger than that. And so there was a lot, after Adams obtains the presidency and then beyond, she begins to suffer a lot of health issues that are real, and then there's others that you sense is part of the depression and just sadness and overwhelming grief. But they're in Russia and they're going to France during Napoleon's war, and she takes Charles Francis. Essentially, they had a coachman and a couple people with him, but she takes him through a war zone all by herself. And she wrote a book about that. She wrote her own book about that.
And how old was he then?
The young boy.
Charles Francis. He
Charles
was young.
Francis. He had to be.
He's only about 7.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
in single digits for sure.
Yeah.
But it just the strength of this woman, is just incredible. The saddest thing for me about Louisa Catherine Adams, other than how John Quincy Adams really did her wrong in so many ways, he wasn't a philanderer though. He was faithful to her, but he did her wrong in he wasn't a supportive husband. And he would pay, his mother, Abigail, famously said to her husband, "Remember the ladies." She was this, even back then, she was this icon of women's rights. And Adams would become friends with all these women abolitionists, like Angelina Grimke, who's incredible, Lucretia Mott. And these women were leading the charge against slavery. They were breaking down barriers left and right. And Adams celebrated them and would speak about them on the floor of Congress. When it came to his own wife, he would belittle her as far as that kind of stuff went. And so, really, I feel like she's a tragic person.
I am struggling a little bit with the description of him as America's greatest public servant.
Sure.
And the reason is because he seems like such a principled advocate.
Mm-hmm.
But what does he do beside take positions, anti-slavery positions, and this, that, and the other? How is he a servant leader? What does he enable?
In 1836, there's a rule passed on the floor of the House of Representatives. It's called the gag rule. First Amendment, you have a right to petition your government for a redress of grievances. That is as much an important First Amendment right as freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, right to peacefully assemble. Adams loathed slavery. But when they passed that rule, the gag rule, where you couldn't mention slavery anymore on the floor of Congress, it was a moment when the anti-slavery, the abolitionists, were flooding the House of Representatives with anti-slavery petitions. So what they would do back then, today you call your congressman, you visit their office, you email them if you have something to say. Back then, you wrote a petition, you sent it to your congressman. There was time set aside in the congressional calendar, and the congressman would get up and read petitions. That's how people's voices were heard. That was an important part of our democracy. Our government derives their power from the consent of the governed. And the right to petition is the pillar of that, right? And so when they passed the gag rule, while Adams didn't believe Congress had it in its power, based on the Constitution, to do anything about slavery in the states where it existed, now you're talking about freedom of speech. Now you're talking about the First Amendment. And so thousands upon thousands of Americans were silenced or gagged. And Adams spent the next 8 years fighting the gag rule. And they tried to censure him twice. He fought that back both times. And he would read these people's petitions in the face of, death threats and just hostility from his Southern colleagues. So that's one example. He defended there was a slave ship called the Amistad. It mutinied. He defended them before the Supreme Court, and he won their freedom. I think that's another tangible example of something he actually did for the citizens. But the defeat of the gag rule, and his defeat, more specifically of his 1842 censure trial, his defeat of beating back that censure, some abolitionists believe that was the first blow against the slaveocracy.
I just want to say I thought that was very cleverly done in your book as well, the build up to how he basically got them to admit that they couldn't sustain the gag rule any longer, and he won that. He fought very
years because the rules of the House there were some standing rules of the House, but the gag rule had to be reintroduced every Congress. So Congress would come into session. You would have like a month, and there was no gag rule for like a month, like until they got the rules all passed. They would vote on the rules, and at some point it does become a standing rule of the House. But for many years, so this became this fight, this yearly fight. And he literally wears down some of these Southern congressmen to the point where they leave Congress because they can't deal with him.
But I did have another question about the publication process. I know you spent a lot of time thinking about it. How much time did you actually have to work on the book before it was ready to publish? And how did you get someone to publish it?
So here's how it went. It went down. I did a podcast series, six episode series about John Quincy Adams. I got an email from an agent who was a fan of the band who said, I think you have a book here. I met with him. He's like, you need to write a proposal. I wrote a proposal. That was about a year-long process. He spent a lot of time being like, well, okay, we need a title. And throwing titles, he's like, the title's very important. The whole pitch, according to him. Title was very important. And so then he sent it to like 20 publishers, and I had 2 interviews, and the very last one I had said, hey, let's do this. And they gave me 1 year.
Wow.
And, but, so there's so much I didn't know, right? There's so much you don't know when you do this. And that was to handing in the finished draft. Well, there's still about another 4 months of edits. And I used that time. I mean, we were down to proofreading, and I was changing some things. So I just took it to the limit, much wiser now. But so because I wrote the podcast series, I would say, how much time did you spend on the book? Probably 3 years. Probably but I didn't realize at the time I was writing the podcast series that I was going to be writing a book. But when it turned to when it was time to write the book, I I knew I had to research Benjamin Lundy and Theodore Weld because I wanted them to be a part of the book in a big way.
And nobody makes deadlines.
That's what I was told from every friend who ever wrote a book. They're like, deadline, schmedline. Nobody makes their deadlines. But, and I talked to Scott about this, it was important for me to make my deadline. Like for me, like I was so excited for the opportunity to write the book and the offer to get paid to write a book that I wanted to show in my first book, like I have people pleasing, right? Like I want them to be like, hey, I work. Like the best compliment we get as a band is when Dane Honeycutt, our tour manager, you know, he's meeting with the venue people or the promoter, and they go, "You guys are the best guys to work with. Your organization is just a dream. All these bands come in here. You guys are the best. We love when you come here. We love that." Like that's kind of what I want from me, from my work. And so it was important for me personally to make every deadline, no matter what. I'll just change it later, you know. And so I did. But yes, duly noted that there's no author in this country that will tell you a deadline is a deadline.
Bust the curve for the rest of us, man.
Thanks.
Did Abigail Adams and John Quincy Adams have a correspondence similar to what she had with her husband and like father?
Oh, Louisa Catherine.
No, Abigail Adams.
Oh, the mother and
her
the son.
Mother and son.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He I don't say idolized. Like he obviously feared and loved his father, right? And it's funny. I was working on something for Father's Day, trying to write like what I hope will be an op-ed, and it's about John Adams and John Quincy Adams' relationship. So I'm reading like it took like 5 of their letters from their life. And one, he addresses his father, he says, how every son addresses their father. Dear sir. But John Quincy was a mama's boy. You know, when John Adams was away, he was with his mom. And she treated him like an adult because he was the oldest male. And it was she who took him by the hand. They walked that mile up that overlook when he was 7 years old to witness the Battle of Bunker Hill. And he always, you know, when he got married, Abigail did not like Louisa Catherine. They did not get along for a while. Eventually they do get along. Eventually they do. It's a tough relationship between mother and daughter-in-law. But mother and son, Abigail ran the show. And John Quincy Adams loved his mother very much. He thought a lot of it. Yes. So God, you sir.
No PhD in your future, no politics in your future. Given your musical background, given the cast of characters that are in this book and what you described tonight, Broadway play, musical.
Oh, I think a Netflix series.
Whatever.
Are you producers?
Who would play John Quincy Adams?
Oh, Christian Bale.
Whoa.
Yeah, I think he can do it. If he could do Dick Cheney, he could do John Quincy Adams. Yeah. Anthony Hopkins was incredible, just with his look when he did it for Amistad. But I think he could Christian Bale.
You talked about some tensions between father and son. Were there public comparisons when John Quincy Adams was in office? Well, your father wouldn't have done that.
Or your father was a failed one-term president, and so are you. Big one. And he also didn't go to his successor's inauguration, just like his father. Yeah. But then you think about John Adams defending the British soldiers, Boston Massacre. John Quincy Adams defends the enslaved captives and the right to due process for the British soldiers, the right to due process for the enslaved people. So there are those similars. He writes a letter to his dad when his dad loses his election to Thomas Jefferson. And he basically says, history will judge you. You stuck by your guns. History will judge you fine. And it's almost like he's writing to himself 30 years later, or however many years later it was. Yeah. It's a great letter. Yes.
So you brought John Quincy to a wider audience with your book. Are there other figures from that period that you think are deserving of the same treatment that should be brought to our attention?
They're not all heroes. And John Quincy's not like, obviously he was a terrible husband. And he crushed he crushed the sons who had all of his sons. He crushed them. Like he crushed them with his personality, just like he was crushed by his father. His father says to him, if you do not rise not only to the head of your profession, but of your country, it's owed only to your own laziness, slovenliness, and obstinacy. But, it's funny because I was thinking about Seward, William Henry Seward, for our next book, because I want to go into the 1850s. And so Adams is this amazing tour guide for the 1830s and 40s. And I'm thinking, who is a great tour guide for the 1850s? And I think Seward is and would be as a senator. But where Adams started out pragmatic on slavery, he ends up radical. Seward starts out radical on slavery, and he ends up very pragmatic, disappointingly so. And so I asked myself, could I really live with that? Like, could I live with someone I'm like, oh. And people do it all the time. Like, people have written biographies about John C. Calhoun. Like, I don't know if anybody knows John C. Calhoun is. He's about one of the worst people on the face of the planet, in my opinion. And so it's like, what is the thing, like, as a writer, like, how do you do that? Like, how do you get into that? Because Adams was, again, very human, very egotistical, not perfect, but the moral core was there, And so what I'm looking at now is I'm surprised. Like, I picked out a time period, and all this stuff is going on, and it's this is like a 2-year period rather than like a 28-year period, which I covered in this book. It would kind of be a sequel to this book in a lot of ways. And I'm like, all these crazy things happen, like from 1848 to the Compromise of 1850. It's like a really crazy time, culturally as well as politically. And all this stuff's going on, and I'm looking at all these people and all this stuff is happening, and I'm like, well, who's the one? Like, who's the camera following? And who do you always come back to? And I'm really shocked that, like, I just had to face facts that this is probably the person you need to keep coming back to. And I'll just leave it at that. So I'll tell you how it goes.
After writing this book, are you optimistic or pessimistic about our future?
I'm optimistic. No, I am notoriously, I call myself a realist, and everybody else calls me a pessimist. You're talking about Ben Sawyer, my podcast co-host, who is a radical optimist. And I was always like, well, he's just an optimist because he hasn't faced anything in life. And then he got cancer. And he was incredibly optimistic through his cancer, and he's doing great. And it's like, I'm like, oh, he really is. Oh, he's legit. Okay. But I'll tell you what makes me a little more hopeful about the state we're in. It's like seeing what happened in Minnesota, like the tragedy of the people being killed, but then the way people came together. And we can fight this back. Like, I get emotional, but it's like we can do this. We may not. And it may be ugly no matter what. And it probably will be. And it's not going to ever look like a victory. But we can at least muddle through to the next period, this is what history always does. It's like you have these little victories, and then things get crappy again, and then you have a little victory, and you probably don't even recognize the victories when they're happening, but they're happening. I think the goal for the United States is maintaining our Constitution and our form of government as best as possible, because corruption's always going to be there. It's always been there. There's a lot of ne'er-do-wells, but then every once in a while we're going to get something right. And it's like we did that with slavery. We got that right, and then it gets pushed back with Reconstruction, and then civil rights. 100 years after the Civil War,
it takes over 100 years after, it takes 100 years after the Civil War to get the Voting Rights Act. And so to be pushed back again, the way we're being pushed back, this makes perfect sense to me. But we can do this.
Seems like a good note to end on.